Welcome back to the Atheopagan Society's YouTube channel. I'm Yucca, and today we are going to be talking about a subject that really deserves a whole series of videos, really. But we're just going to start with the one video today, and that's the idea of science and Atheopaganism. So this is a really, really big topic, especially because we often say that we are grounded in or informed by science. So let's have a little bit of a conversation about what is science and how that might be used in our practices. So starting with the idea of science, this is a term that can actually mean a lot of different things when it's said. So broadly speaking, we can categorize science into three really big categories. The first is to think about science as a process, right? Science is a way of learning about, inquiring about the world. And if you ever learned the scientific method back in school, that's what we're talking about, right? And a lot of people will say that's what true science is. But when the term is used, it could mean some other things as well. So the second big category would be thinking about science as the body of knowledge that we as humanity have learned by doing science, the process. So if you ever took a high school biology class or chemistry or something like that, that's what we're talking about. So most of the time when people take a science class or are talking about science, they're really talking about the knowledge that was gained. Now, it's really important to say, and we'll talk about this more, that that knowledge is continuing to be revised, changed as our understanding grows. Sometimes we've got to throw old ideas out, bring new ones in, and sometimes we got to bring back old ones and go, oops, we kind of threw the baby out with bathwater with that one, right? Now, our third category, this is the one that is a little trickier. And this is the category where when people say science, they might be referring to the people who do science, scientists, or the institutions that do science, and the ideas, culture, ethics, the things that surround that. So, for example, you've probably read or seen or heard a media headline that says, science says XYZ is bad for you. Well, okay, process can't say anything, or a body of knowledge can't say anything because it's not a person. But a person can interpret the data. They can come to a conclusion. An institution can have an official opinion about something. So that third category is also what we think of as science sometimes. So when in conversation about the idea or the concept of science, we've got to kind of clear up, what are we talking about? Now, for this, I'm going to focus mostly on our first category or definition and the second. So thinking about science as a process and thinking about the knowledge that we can gain through and have gained through doing science. So with science, it's a way of trying to learn about the world, right? But certain types of questions are scientific and other types of questions aren't. Now, that doesn't mean that those questions aren't valid and important questions to ask, but they're not something that you can use the framework of science to actually find an answer to. So kind of a classic example of that would be, what's the meaning of life? Well, that is a great question to ask, but you can't answer that with science. Because for something to be scientific, a question to be scientific, it has to be falsifiable, by which we mean that you would actually be able to show that it was wrong, right? That you could prove it wrong, whatever the answer was. Now, it could be, your conclusion could be correct, right? But if it was wrong, there'd have to be a way to show that it was wrong. And we need to have everything that we do and our understanding in science has to be based on evidence, right? Evidence are our clues that we have. And those have to be based on independently verifiable and reproducible evidence. So basically, if I do an experiment, that same experiment has to be able to be done by somebody else, assuming that they could replicate the same conditions, right? And then they have to be able to get the same result. If you get a completely different result every single time, well, we can't use that as our evidence, right? So these are just some of the kind of basics around science. And we have a lot of different theoretical frameworks. Ooh, do you hear the rain coming in? Okay. Hopefully I'll be able to finish. It doesn't look like it's going to be that much. So we have different theoretical frameworks that help inform how we set up our experiments and how we actually interpret the information that we gather, because that's really, really big as well. So then we start getting into constructivism and positivism, all of that kind of stuff. Okay, so this is all wonderful, but how do we now apply this to our practice as pagans, atheopagans, non-theist pagans, or folks just interested in seeing the world and using science as a framework for understanding the world? Well, first of all, let's go back to our different categories, right? And we can come at this from our different categories. Well, we can start by using the body of knowledge of science, excuse me, as a way to inform our cosmology, right? So we have learned and are learning every single day just amazing things about the world, from the soil to how the Earth as a planet works, cosmology, thinking about, particle physics, all of this amazing, amazing stuff. There's so much knowledge and it's so rich. And just digging into that and just even just the surface of digging into that is just amazing. And also, I want to say that that's changing constantly, right? It does take a little bit of time for the understanding from the experts in the field to kind of reach out and spread to the non-experts in the field. And for instance, somebody who studies soil, their understanding of soil is going to be very, very different than somebody who is an expert in a different field, who studies lunar geology or something like that, right? So it takes time for that communication to happen and for that to reach out and extend to the general public as well. But as people who are interested in that, we can't know about everything, but we can kind of keep an eye on it and try to be as informed as we can and to really try and be as scientifically literate as possible. So in talking about scientific literacy, not just knowing the stuff, right, that body of knowledge and kind of keeping abreast of that, but also having a general understanding of how the process of science itself works and some of the types of ways of thinking that allow us to do science. So that's from the body perspective. But we could also think about science from the process or the doing and how we could use that in our own practices. So let's think about an example. So what if I really wanted to look at in my own life how I could work on, say, being more relaxed or mindful or improving my meditation or something like that? Well, I could go to the literature. As any person who is able to access the internet or library and can look at the literature, which is, I know, in today's internet world is going to be very accessible for the most part. By the way, your library probably has subscriptions to most journals, or you can get access to them. So just talk to your librarian if you can't find what you're looking for on Google Scholar or PubMed or whatever it is that you're looking on for free. But I could look into the research that has been done on meditation and on neuroplasticity and that's a mouthful to say, by the way, and all of those sorts of terms, because there has been research done on that. And I can look for, okay, what have these researchers found to be the most effective method given these conditions or something like that. So that's still in sort of the knowledge area. But I could also use science itself in my life as sort of a informal science to try and experiment with myself in finding what is most effective and using the same steps that we might use to design a good experiment for just a n equals 1, right? So that's, I mean, I think that putting those together, the power of finding science, finding research that is going to be really effective in our lives, using the process of science, even if we're not, working for an institution or something like that, and using the knowledge to inform our cosmology is fantastic. If we stopped there, it would be brilliant, right? But we could also add in a little bit more from that third category where I talked about the scientist institutions, but also the sort of culture and ethics and attitudes surrounding science. And some of the ones that I think are really valuable to bring in, the first would be the openness to change, because good science, and this is something that we strive to do in science, is to correct. Science is a self-correcting process that's always looking, or rather, the scientists, see how I used the science of that third meaning right there, are always looking to better understand, to find new information, to challenge our previous ideas. And so bringing that, the spirit of that into our own lives, in whatever field, part of our life, I think is really powerful. And that celebration of finding out that you were wrong so that you can improve, and then the celebration of that improvement, I think is just beautiful. And also the other things would be being really aware of some of the challenges that our natural thinking process has, like confirmation bias, and being aware that that exists. So how do we design, now in science it would be, how do we design an experiment that is going to not be compromised by that as much as possible? Well, how do we do that with our daily life as well, right? How do I minimize that confirmation bias and other types of fallacies? All right, so we jumped around a lot with this topic. And as I said at the beginning, I think that we could spend months on each of these topics, really. This could be a series. But I think so that we don't make this, a super, super long video, I'm going to go ahead and pause here. I didn't get rained on too much. I hope you heard some of that thunder in there. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this week. We will be back next week with more, fun, interesting topics. As always, we really appreciate your feedback and comments, and any suggestions that you have for topics. We're always looking for those. So thank you so much, everybody.